Synthwave is a genre of electronic music which transports us back to the 1980s. At its core is a knowing and affectionate tribute to the decade and the sounds that made the music of the time so recognisable. Here we'll be looking at Synthwave's key characteristics and musical features.
As I believe the Earthlings say, lay it on me, man.
Synthwave emerged in the late 2000s when songwriters wanted to reappropriate the sounds of the 80s. It contains many allusions to films, video games, music videos, and TV shows from the past, coupled with acknowledging the influence of electronic music composers of the time, such as Vangelis and bands like Tangerine Dream. A significant event in the early days of Synthwave was Kavinsky's track Night Call being included on the soundtrack to the 2011 film Drive.
I'm giving you a night call, tell you how I feel.
Additionally, several French EDM composers who were part of the Valerie collective also helped popularise this new style. Other notable artists were FM Attack and Perturbator, whose tracks featured in the 2012 game Hotline Miami. The 80s revival has seen a notable resurgence in recent years, with shows like Stranger Things and films such as Blade Runner 2049 being enjoyed by younger viewers, sparking a renewed and sustained interest in 80s culture. The game Grand Theft Auto Vice City is sometimes cited as a further inspiration which helped boost the popularity of Synthwave. Synthwave is sometimes known as Outrun. This stems from the arcade game of the same name, which had a memorable soundtrack. Other names sometimes seen are retrosynth, retrowave, electrowave, and future synth. Whilst some view these as specific subgenres in their own right, others consider them more or less interchangeable. For simplicity, I'll be using the term synthwave to represent the genre as a whole. Synthwave has strong links with the cyberpunk movement. Portrayals of a dystopian society are common, possibly involving governmental or societal collapse, whilst being juxtaposed with advanced technology.
Ah, I see you have the machine that goes bing!
Here one can see echoes of the original Blade Runner from 1982. Protagonists in videos are sometimes portrayed as outcasts, getting by in life alone and not needing the company of others.
City boy!
Their surroundings are often rainy cityscapes, with frequent use of blue and pink colour schemes and neon lighting. Much 80s technology is ostensibly shown, such as cassettes, video and arcade games, old computers, and VHS players.
They still have one of those TVs with the big fat back.
Another widespread style of visual is one with a sunnier Miami Vice vibe. We see rows of palm trees, sprawling city skylines, and endless straight roads, but the neon lighting is retained. Cars are a ubiquitous part of the synthwave aesthetic, and there are many references to the uniquely styled concept cars of the 1970s and 80s, not to mention iconic 80s vehicles which left their mark on popular culture, such as the Ferrari F40, Lamborghini Countach, and of course the DeLorean.
I don't believe it!
In addition to these sweeping urban visuals, more obvious sci-fi allusions can be found, with depictions of outer space, videos featuring androids and robotics, distant planets, and grid lines reminiscent of the 1982 film Tron. Some say this has resulted in the creation of a separate microgenre called space synth. Synthwave promotes a reverence for the 1980s to the extent that a new universe has been created by visual artists, which is very futuristic, way more so than the 80s actually were. Band names and track titles often reinforce this, either tying in with sci-fi themes and using stylized spellings of certain words with retro-style fonts, or including well-known 80s actors and characters in their YouTube thumbnails. Like any type of music, Synthwave has spawned a few subcategories, each with their own characteristics. Horrorwave delves into the world of emulating soundtracks, incorporating atmospheric, ambient sounds and haunting melodies alongside rather heavy, unsettling bass lines. Horrorwave gives off a more cinematic atmosphere, the drums adding a menacing quality to the music. There is a strong influence of the seminal horror scores created by Goblin and John Carpenter. The keyboard-driven music for Carpenter's films Escape from New York, The Fog, and The Thing are still influential to many composers even now. Darksynth is the edgier side of synthwave, employing more distorted sounds.
Now I'm into something darker.
Perturbator is often held as one of the original Darksynth creators. Others in this subgenre include Power Glove, Necromancer, Zombie Hyperdrive, and Dynatron. Darksynth takes inspiration from sci-fi, horror and cyberpunk, going further than Horrorwave in some respects by combining more aggressive synth tones with harder-hitting drums and intense effects processing. It explores a grittier and grimy world, something far removed from the Miami sunsets depicted by other synthwave music, which gives off a much brighter and more optimistic tone. At the other end of the spectrum, Chillwave takes a far more laid-back approach. It creates a more relaxed and introspective atmosphere, featuring somewhat washed-out textures, hazy vocals, and a slightly slower tempo. A relative of Chillwave is Vaporwave, which is seen as an entire aesthetic rather than simply a style of music. Visuals feature images of late 80s and early 90s consumerism and web design. Vaporwave artists employ much sampling, sometimes taking snippets of jazz or easy listening music as some of its starting points. They then manipulate these sounds with pitch shifting or time stretching techniques to create a surreal woozy effect. The Vaporwave movement is characterized by geometric shapes and pastel colors, along with the grid lines previously mentioned. Synthwave captures the essence of the 1980s and celebrates it. Consequently, tracks imbue the listener with a sense of nostalgia, allowing them to revisit past memories. Music videos often contain montages of 80s film clips, deliberately edited in such a way to encourage this. Recent scientific research has highlighted the psychological and physical benefits of nostalgia. A 2008 study discovered that it helps restore a sense of social connection and reduces feelings of loneliness. A 2013 article found that nostalgia can improve one's mood by formulating effective coping mechanisms during times of stress. Most interestingly of all, a study from 2012 revealed that it can even induce physical warmth, with some participants perceiving the ambient temperature as being higher than it actually was after recalling a nostalgic event. As with any decade, the 80s weren't without their negatives. Certainly in the UK we had rioting, strikes, high unemployment and political uncertainty.
I am a self-made man, and I could buy you.
However, this isn't really what synthwave is about. Whilst it can be said that this music romanticises the period, its goal first and foremost is not to force any pessimism on its audience, but instead allow them to focus on more positive things in order to lift their mood, or, like any style of music, provide a bit of escapism. Synthwave possesses several distinct musical features which help conjure up the retro-futuristic world it is based around. The music broadly focuses on keyboard sounds, a large body of the genre is instrumental, and the use of drum machines, though acoustic instruments are often used as well, particularly guitar and sax, either as an integral colour within the main body of the piece, or to emulate solo lines heard in classic 80s songs. Drum parts tend to be processed in order to recreate vintage sounds, including the massive snare drum backbeats with gated reverb, which was so prevalent at the time. A lot of synthwave tracks are very busy musically, with much layering to give a full and lush sound. Here is an example from the track Accelerated by Miami Nights 1984. We start with a sustained pad, to which a long sweeping effect is added, lasting for most of the introduction. A second part then enters shortly after, playing the same chord but with a more obvious attack, like an electric piano. This brightens gradually throughout the opening until the bass and drums enter. After the main drum beat starts, the chord is embellished by a third part playing semiquavers, effectively arpeggiating 4 notes taken from the initial chord. The second voice then becomes more active and syncopated, playing scrunchy, cluster-like chords. Note also that all of these elements are taking place in the same register. These dense textures are typical of the synthwave sound world.
Yeah, just simple lines intertwining.
Next, harmonies don't rely solely on the basic triads one tends to find in a lot of generic modern pop music. Instead, we hear chords with added 7ths, 9ths and 11ths, which enhance the harmony with colour and tension, since these chords are naturally quite expressive. Darksynth tracks, on the other hand, tend to embellish chords with accidentals and non-functional progressions, creating more sinister harmonies and adding to the disconcerting atmosphere. Here are some more examples of added note chords. This last excerpt from Heroes by The Midnight is worthy of special mention. The guitar chord, G-7 suspended 4th, is a very strong tribute to the 1979 hit Walking on the Moon by The Police. Combined with the repeated quavers on the tonic in the bass and precise drum part, this is clearly a nod to one of the most famous bands of the 80s. The vocal excerpt from Heroes contains a little phrase which deserves looking into further. It's very simple when broken down, a descending semitone followed by a descending major third. It's interesting to see just how much this little melodic idea is used in synthwave music. In fact, it's so common I'm going to call it the Synthwave Lick. This figure can be played as sustained notes, in a syncopated fashion, or used as an ostinato. It works when played over both major chords or minor chords. By coincidence, this 3-note vocal hook was also used by The Police in different ways. Have a listen and see how prevalent the Synthwave Lick is.
incredible.
It's almost as if the nostalgic essence of synthwave and the 80s revival movement as a whole is condensed into these 3 notes. If we take the last note and shift it up an octave, and then swap the first 2 pitches around, we get a related figure, which is an ascending semitone followed by an ascending perfect fifth. Let's call this the Outrun Rise. The Outrun Rise features repeatedly in the genre too. Take a listen. This motif seems to capture something about synthwave which is perhaps a little harder to explain.
Flennon!
That rising perfect fifth especially seems to imply hope and aspiration, reaching for something, a feeling of wistful contentment, or moving forward purposely following a period of deep reflection. If you're brand new to synthwave, I would advise initially checking out music by the following. These writers produce what are widely regarded as quintessential synthwave tracks, and are a very accessible route into this style if you've no idea where to begin. There are numerous channels on YouTube devoted to promoting synthwave and its subgenres, and offer a wealth of listening material. For further info and interviews with prominent synthwave artists, I recommend checking out the documentary film Rise of the Synths, narrated by John Carpenter. I was born in 1983, so by the time the 80s were over, I was just 6 years old. Whilst some say it wasn't always so wonderful being a working adult back then,
Bueller.
living through the 80s as a teenager is often seen as something of a privilege. It must have been really thrilling seeing on the big screen significant films which have now attained legendary cult status.
I haven't seen Evil Dead 2 yet.
Or to hear firsthand albums by musicians whose work is still loved and remains in the public consciousness today. Something that comes up a lot in discussions regarding synthwave and the 80s in general is the absence of social media, the sentiment being that the 80s were a more carefree and far less cynical time, with no pointless clickbait that seems to clog up everyone's lives unnecessarily these days.
Shut up, man!
Comments on synthwave videos on YouTube regularly demonstrate this, and there is a palpable sense of the audience finding common ground by sharing nostalgic experiences. It could be a moment with friends filled with laughter that hasn't been equalled, a family holiday, or a whirlwind summer romance with someone you've never seen since. Maybe you were with the love of your life, and it ended for whatever reason. You lost a relative or a loved one when you were younger, or fell out of touch with a friend just because life got in the way. A Japanese idiom that's very apt for synthwave is monono aware. It doesn't really have a specific English translation, but a literal meaning is often cited as the sorrow of objects. The phrase deals with the concept of impermanence. Monono aware is a profound yet succinct way of saying that certain things in life are transient, and there is a gentle yet beautiful sadness knowing they will eventually pass. Synthwave encapsulates this perfectly. Its combination of retro sounds and visuals, emotive harmonies, heartfelt lyrics, and driving rhythms has a very pervasive effect on listeners, helping them to reflect on things like love, friendships, growing up, and exciting or joyous past events. Now it's time to rewind that cassette, get in the car, and drive.
Groovy.